Viewers, you're watching The Explosive Exclusive with me and Navika Kumar, and we focus on the big story that broke earlier today, Navika, and that was really the story of suddenly the Chinese announcing that they were going to be pulling back some of their troops in 4 particular points along the LAC, which have been witnessing some amount of tension between India and the Chinese forces. These 4 points are, of course, Patrol Point 14, which is the site of the violent clash in the Galwan Valley, 2 in the Hot Springs area, and one else, which is Gogra. A post exactly in Gogra, where there has been some trouble. But that's not really the explosive story, is it? We have been speaking with insiders in government, Navika, and they have been saying that this is not a pullback, but a pushback.
Absolutely, make no mistake, this has been a sure movement by Prime Minister Narendra Modi, and he has choreographed this entire action that has happened. In fact, we spoke with insiders, and Rahul, they gave us the entire story. In fact, Insider 1 told us China hasn't really pulled back. China has been made to push back by a united India, the kind of resolve India showed, the kind of no negotiation on the LAC attitude that was taken by Prime Minister Narendra Modi, and the way we sent the message across that India is not going to negotiate its map. The map that India has will stay as it is for as long as it takes, and not only as long, but whatever it takes to be done will be done to push China back. So the Prime Minister was absolutely clear in his mind when he was devising his strategy with his team of experts, and he was very clear what the bottom line was when there were interactions on the military front, on the diplomatic front, and the strategic front. He was very clear on this. In fact, the insider number 2 also tells us that center wanted to convey to the Chinese that they were dealing with a new India, and this is not an India which is going to back off. This was not going to be an India which would take things lying down. In Doklam, we had shown our resolve, and this was another occasion where we would not take being on the back foot as an alternative. Also, another insider said China had come to expect that India would be soft, and India would look at the fact that it is dealing with COVID, the kind of resources it takes to have a head-on collision with China would be something that would make India pull back. And also they felt that their military prowess, their prowess in the region around, and using of our neighboring countries like Bangladesh, Nepal and Pakistan against us would put India on the defensive. And that was not something the Prime Minister was going to agree to. Also, no blinking was his bottom line.
And Navika, of course, we have seen in the past that previous administrations, the ones before Mr. Modi, were reluctant to change the status quo along any of our frontiers or in dealings with any of those countries that have previously tried to, at some level or the other, pressure India or show a certain belligerence towards India. Well, that has changed. Inside revelation number 4, this is very, very important. This is what really has translated into the Indian government being able to hit back, because they said that Modi gave us a free hand from day one, saying that India's sovereignty will not be negotiable. That's a point that Navika also made while she was speaking to insiders. Insider Revelation 5, economic infallibility of China received a tight slap. Look at the words. With Prime Minister's Aatmanirbhar Bharat doctrine. So, Navika, this is very significant.
It was a very, very well thought out plan. It had 3 components. It had strategic components, it had economic components, and it had technology components. And anybody who felt that India did not have the technological prowess to hit back everything, all our technology was controlled by China, and that India, because it is so dependent on imports from China, would be on the back foot because it did not have the ability to sustain its supply chains if it did not import from China. But India was taking absolutely no decision that would in anyhow show that India was a majboor country and not a mazboot country. So whether it was maps or apps, the Prime Minister was clear in his message to China, and when the 59 apps were removed, it just showed China that this is something that can be done, that can be done by India, and this will have ripple effects, cascading effects across the world. And already Chinese companies who had investments in India were actually pressurizing their own government in China that this was a big market and economically suicidal for China to close the Indian market for these companies who had investments
here. What we're being told is that $50 billion was at stake, and that's really what rattled the Chinese, Navika.
Yeah, that rattled the Chinese, and the impact that it had from these companies themselves going and actually telling the Chinese government that please, moderate your policy towards India, because we are the one who've got money on the ground, and we are the one who are losing. And in China, the lines, the boundaries between the Communist Party of China and companies and the government are very, very blurred. So ultimately, the economic shock would have been felt by the Chinese establishment, and that pressure also did the trick in terms of China getting down to realistic talking across with their diplomats, with the special representatives. And today's decision on de-escalation is based on this three-pronged strategy, and the bottom line being absolutely crystal clear from Prime Minister Modi. This was not some, diplomacies which was coached in very good words and, could continue for the next 6 months to 6 years, whenever. This was the message of Prime Minister Narendra Modi, and he was going to tolerate no nonsense.
No nonsense, absolutely. In fact, in Modi's worldview, we were being told Chinese companies will no longer get the share of the pie in India, the lion's share of the pie. No way. That was subtly also conveyed, in fact, to the Chinese, and the Prime Minister's Leh visit was the final nail, we are being told, in the China's coffin. It showed that India's troops will not hesitate to deliver a severe blow to expansionists. The word expansion is very interesting, Navika, because the Prime Minister used it when he went, in fact, to Leh.
That's right. In fact, the Prime Minister's thunderous speech there in Leh, addressing the Jawans, had the morale of the Jawans of the armed forces so high that actually the world sat back and took notice. This was not a leader of a country who was going to, bargain from a position of a disadvantage. He was ready to go for the kill, and, it's not the result of that altercation, result of that confrontation that was really going to be bothered. It was the message. It was the message which was important, and the Prime Minister, when he spoke to the Jawans, was very clear that India, its forces and its leadership had the tenacity and had the self-confidence to look at the adversary in the eye and have the guts to push it back. And when the Prime Minister made the statement about expansionist forces in the world, it was a statement that was picked up across the world by many leaders, and you saw the kind of international support that it drummed up, and this was a resurgent India. The Prime Minister wasn't backing off. If anything, he was right there on the front line, leading his armed forces if need be.
The message coming out is that New India has shown it can inflict damage to the enemy where it actually hurts.
Absolutely. On the front line, through our forces, on the economic front, with our economic discussions and decisions that we've taken, the Prime Minister had it sorted out. And when the Chinese found that all that was being translated into the talks that were happening at the military level and at the diplomatic level, the message went loud and clear. And also Chinese companies were not interested in a world where China was only going to be seen as a big bully, as a goon, because Chinese companies have interests in economic areas in various parts of the world. And if China was going to behave like this with a large country like India, then Southeast Asian countries, the West, all of them would be then looking at China as the real red dragon who needed to be pushed back or who needed to be isolated in the world, given the fact that China's role in the COVID spread and this military action, military flexing of muscles, not just with India, but in other parts of the South China Sea and
14 other countries.
Many other countries.
And now with Bhutan.
Australia, Bhutan,
Philippines,
Taiwan, Hong Kong,
Vietnam.
Everything was called out.
Yeah.
So the world view was that China couldn't appear to be a bully of this sort because it would have to pay a huge price. And that's the language that
what
China
you're
had.
saying, Navika, is that the conversations you've been having with these insiders, the message is loud and clear, viewers, that this is no pullback. This is a pushback by a decisive leadership led by the Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who has actually come out there and taken a very conscious decision to punish China. Let's have a look at some of those individuals who allowed the Prime Minister to actually...
That's right, there was a whole core team that was working, and
the Punish China team.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was led by the Prime Minister himself. The Prime Minister, Rahul, has been literally burning the midnight oil. He has had every single person who's involved in the briefing has been talking to the Prime Minister directly. Yes, there are the official channels through which information comes, but he's a hands-on guy. He's not going to be only satisfied with the succinct summaries that are presented to him. He's been on the drawing board. He's been talking to the people involved. He's been strategizing with his team, and top people in his team that he has relied on include the External Affairs Minister, Mr. S. Jaishankar, and of course his right-hand man in strategic affairs, the National Security Advisor Ajit Doval, who have been right there in the middle, and of course the Foreign Secretary Harsh Shringla, who has been speaking to various embassies and his counterparts in various parts of the world, and getting the entire network of embassies of India in various parts of the world to talk, drum up support, and also use very effective members of the diaspora to carry India's message across, to drum up support for India. So it's been at every level, strategic, diplomatic, as well as military level, that this entire issue has been dealt
And then,
with.
of course, some prominent American influencers, Senator Rick Scott, Senator Marco Rubio, Senator Tom Cotton, Senator Ami Bera, Senator Eliot Engel, all coming in to also lobby with the American government. And you've seen, viewers, how the Americans have responded by sending their battleships, Nimitz as well as Ronald Reagan, into the South China Sea, opening another front of sorts. Also, of course, the United States standing in consonance really with India, making all the right noises, saying that, look, China needs to quickly review and that matters need to go back to the way they were. So there was also very implicitly from China a message to Beijing that restore the status quo ante, otherwise it's not going to be fun. There has been military exercises that we've undertaken with the Japanese, a whole plethora of steps that have been taken, Navika, to try and put pressure from all over on the Americans. Let's open this out.
Absolutely, and the message has been loud and clear, and it is not going to be a defensive India that's going to strike back.